Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. Today I want to talk about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new, you might recall that a few months ago I did a video expressing my disappointment at the mediocre showing of Netflix's To Dumb event. However, the one point that I made that was positive in that video was my pleasant surprise over how incredible the presentation was for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. After that, this film shot up to the upper echelon of my most anticipated films for the remainder of 2022. A lot of people have already seen this film, and not only that, Pinocchio is a story that a lot of viewers already have some level of familiarity with. Because of that, I'm going to be slightly less filtered in talking about this film, so if all you want to know is if I recommend it, yes, I do. 5 stars. Watch it this Friday, December 9th on Netflix. That's all the feedback I will be giving that is completely free of spoilers. There are already a lot of reviews of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, so instead of just offering my feedback in the usual ways that I would do for a review of an upcoming release, I wanted to instead expand my scope of discussion to better understand why this film is so remarkable and what makes it feel so classic despite it being a new release. The main two reasons why I feel Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio feels classic are the medium and the maturity in the approach to the story despite it being technically a kid's film or a children's story. Right from the beginning of me being introduced to this project through the To Dumb presentation, I was captivated by how it looked visually. This film was done in stop-motion animation, which is a medium that is very rarely prioritized or funded in today's media landscape. Hollywood significantly prioritizes animation that is done digitally, and beyond just the animation genre, there has been a massive shift away from the more practical forms of filmmaking and special effects in favor of doing things digitally. I don't bring this up to say that all digital technology is bad, but the ugly truth of the matter is that part of why Hollywood executives do this is because digital VFX artists are not unionized on a wide scale the way that the older departments in the filmmaking machine are. A Guardian article from September of this year said, visual effects are increasingly relied upon in the entertainment industry with the explosion of content through streaming services, but the people behind this work have reported poor working conditions, including long hours without overtime, low pay, a lack of benefits, intense workloads, and productivity demands. Visual effects workers are currently pushing to unionize with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, which currently represents over 150,000 workers in arts, media, and entertainment. This also means that studios, networks, and producers are going to be far less willing to fund projects in more traditional animation forms, including stop motion. This means that an entire art form begins to fade into the background, which consequently deprives audiences everywhere from experiencing this unique form of artistry. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio has been in development hell for years. He has been trying to get this film made for well over a decade. Visually, you cannot fault this film. Watching it, you can't help but feel transported to this world and feel completely immersed. Even though it's supposed to be set in the 1930s in fascist Italy, as that was a time period when Italy was under the rule of Mussolini, the visual aesthetic of the stop-motion animation makes it also feel like it's its own reality. So you get the socio-political commentary from the writing and the setting, as well as the brief appearance of Mussolini during one scene of the film, but you also feel the awe and wonder that you would get from watching a film in the fantasy genre. One other point I want to express appreciation for about the way this film has a reverence for animation as an art form is that Guillermo del Toro has the animators credited in the end credits before the names of the actors are shown. Ewan McGregor's Jiminy Cricket also sings a song, and he is still visible on the screen when the credits begin in order to ensure that the audience keeps watching while the names of these animators are shown. I have said in more than one video that I want more movies to start putting bloopers in the credits again like they used to, but depending on the genre, of course. I think they work better to include when the movie is a comedy, whether it's a rom-com, an action comedy, or just a straight-up comedy. But part of why it's good to put bloopers in the credits is because it makes people keep watching. I personally go to the cinema every week, and I see a consistent disregard for the credits among moviegoers. People stand up and leave as soon as the names start rolling. But moving beyond the surface-level look of the film, the other reason why I mentioned, as as to why Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio feels so classic is because of the maturity of the storytelling. To contextualize what I mean when I refer to mature storytelling as classic, I need to first point out that I am specifically referring to the practice of not shying away from challenging, serious, or heavy subject matter in stories that are largely made for children or are at least supposed to be accessible to children. The more slightly modern version of this would probably be some of the Pixar films. The opening of Up is probably one of the most popular examples of this concept, but even the opening of Finding Nemo with the death of Nemo's mother. But watching Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, I couldn't help but have these deep-cut memories resurface of the stark contrast in some kids' films that were released in the 90s versus ones that were released from the 2000s onward. The original Pinocchio film that most people are familiar with is probably the Disney film from the 1940s. So using Disney as a point of focus is a good example for this particular talking point. The 90s had some very mature Disney films that were made for children. Watching Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, I had this one film emerge from the deepest caverns of my memory, except I couldn't remember the name of the title. I just knew that it was a film about boys singing in a choir, and there was a racist bully who was always trying to commit hate crimes. So I pulled up a search engine, and I typed in some sort of word salad that read something along the lines of Disney Boys Choir Racism, and it popped up. Perfect Harmony, released in 1991. This is a film that is set during the Civil Rights Movement, and it takes place in the South, and it does not shy away from the subject matter of violent racism, at least when you consider that the film was made for children. A lot of kids' films will have a bully, right? We all know this. Well, the bully in Perfect Harmony dons a pointed hood before committing an assault. Another film that I would still classify as part of this era of serious 90s films, even though technically it was released in 2000, is The Color of Friendship. Now, it was released for Black History Month of 2000, so February, meaning that all of the development, production, and whatnot would have still happened in the 90s. This is a film that taught children about apartheid in South Africa. Furthermore, what I didn't actually know until I was looking up this film for the first time in I don't know how many years, because Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio reminded me of this particular era of children's films, is that the two girls from The Color of Friendship who became friends are in fact based on real people, and that Marnie, the white girl from South Africa who starts off racist and then unlearns that racism before returning to South Africa as a supporter of the fight to end apartheid, the woman she is inspired from, who was actually named Carrie, helped to form the first anti-apartheid student underground movement when she returned to South Africa, and tragically is believed to have been murdered by the apartheid regime because of her activism. Now, there was a clear switch in Disney Channel's content, as well as just broader Hollywood content, after 2001, and you can probably guess why. There was an up spike in Disney Channel promoting militant jingoism in the movies that they released, and they even had their child stars doing these horrific propaganda reels that are as stomach-churning for me to watch now as Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Well, there was a video floating around Twitter, which I do not have the time currently to try to dig up and include in this video, but it was of Guillermo del Toro at some sort of promotional event for Pinocchio, and he was asked a question about having serious subject matter in a kid's film because his new Pinocchio film does not shy away from the uncomfortable reality of Italy in the 1930s under the rule of fascism. Guillermo responded that today's generation of children are very aware of the fact that they live in a state of climate emergency, that they are living through a global pandemic, and that there is horrific violence by police perpetrated against civilians who are often but not always black and brown. Children absolutely have the intelligence and emotional awareness to have serious topics included in the stories that they grow up watching. There are so many lines of dialogue in Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio that encourage child viewers to stand up and rebel against unquestioningly following orders, authority, or state-sanctioned violence. Villainy in Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is present in the ways that you would expect, militant fascists, but we also have Count Volpe, that's Christoph Waltz's character, who is symbolic of capitalism. of greed at the expense of the well-being of others. Count Volpe is an animal abuser, and he wants to exploit Pinocchio for profit to the point of Pinocchio's death. This is a story that shows how sometimes the most brave thing you can do, child or not, is to just say no to a militant fascist. It's a story that tells you to not sign contracts presented to you by greedy businessmen. It's a story that addresses other challenging topics like death, grief, and mortality. It tells you that breaking the rules in order to save someone's life is absolutely the most ethical course of action. It's also an anti-war story, which in and of itself is extremely rare to see in a Hollywood film, be it one made for kids or adults. Hollywood as an industry takes in a lot of state money in exchange for perpetuating warmongering propaganda that will brainwash the masses into supporting the military-industrial complex. A film like Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is simultaneously classic and contemporary because the socio-political subtext within its period piece speaks to the same fights being fought today by anti-war activists, by anti-fascists, and by anti-capitalists. Seeing the finished work of art, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that it took Guillermo del Toro so long to be able to get it made. The visual medium he chose, the tone being as serious as it is when it's technically a children's film. For example, Pinocchio dies multiple times in the story, though he does come back to life. And the anti-war messaging are completely antithetical to what Hollywood likes to fund and distribute. I know that a lot of people are critical of Netflix as a platform and as a corporation. I'm critical of them the same way I'm critical of absolutely every giant corporation that exists, whether in Hollywood or otherwise. But Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is a prime example of how it has become a beacon for auteurs who have already built up their names and status in the traditional Hollywood system to come to. At Netflix, they are able to receive the funding and the green light to do the projects that the old Hollywood system says no to. Jean-Pierre Jeunet, Martin Scorsese, Zack Snyder, Guillermo del Toro. And Pinocchio is one of the greatest outcomes I've seen of that relationship dynamic. So those are some of my broader thoughts on the significance of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio and why it feels so classic. I would have loved to speak more about the film, but I am making this video in a hurry. I have both a written assignment and a final coming up this week, but I do have some other videos I would like to do for December after I finish with those things. Some end of the year videos and some reviews, analyses, whatever you'd like to call them. So feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to support what it is that I do on here, as well as to keep up with all of what I will be uploading next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.